Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a video that was very difficult to narrow down, or yeah, I mean, you can see the title. I'm basically going to show you the 10 palettes I would keep if I could only keep 10 palettes. And again, this is not an easy choice, but I have narrowed it down to 10 and I'm going to share those palettes with you today. I'm going to also share kind of the process I went through to narrow it down to these 10, because I have at the moment, I think, somewhere between 35 and 40 palettes in my collection. So it's quite a lot, and yeah, it was very difficult to narrow down. But before I jump into the palettes, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So how I narrowed this down was that I kind of put my palettes into categories. I started with more neutral palettes, so I did warm tone palettes, cool tone palettes. Then the next category I was like neutral with a twist, so not kind of colorful palettes or anything like that, more like still neutral palettes, but they had like a bit of a twist to them, so a bit maybe more purple, a bit more green in them and stuff like that. And again, I kind of sorted by different categories, so like warm tone, cool tone, and then mixed. And then lastly I did colorful, so I did different type of colored palettes, and again I kind of mixed them into different categories, and that's how I was able to narrow this down, because I did want to have somewhat a broad kind of selection, not just pick colorful palettes and not just pick neutral palettes and so on. So that's how I went about it. So the first palette that I narrowed down to was warm neutral palettes, and I decided to pick one palette from this category. You might already be able to guess which palette that is, and that is my Eyeshadow Gold palette. I love this palette so much. It's probably one of the first one that I thought of that I would keep if I could only keep a couple of palettes. This is such a beautiful palette. I mean, it does have, I guess, two blue shades in here, but overall it is a pretty warm tone neutral palette, and it's such good quality. This is definitely the best quality Natasha Denona palette that I have. It's stunning. The shimmers are very sparkly. You do get a good variety of kind of shades in here. These do lean a bit more cool tone, but I would still say they are somewhat on the neutral tone side, so not like super cool toned. You get a lot of kind of more warm toned browns, so like more kind of, you know, regular warm tone, like orange leaning, a bit more yellow leaning, and then obviously loads of beautiful shimmers. So this is the first palette I would keep if I could only keep one, and this is the one kind of representing the warm toned neutrals. Next up we have my cool tone neutrals, and I actually picked two palettes from this category, which surprised me, but I feel like they are different enough. The first one is my Sultry palette from Anastasia. I know right now Anastasia is having lots of chroma. I'm not going to comment on it, but I do really love this palette, and I would keep this if I could only keep 10 palettes. As you can see, there is a lot of cool toned shades in here. It's kind of more grey based, I would say, or like taupey based. There are a few more kind of rosy tones in here, like Rose Quartz and Bloom. It's almost more like yeah, like a peachy rosy shade. Like a coral, that's the name. It's a coral shade, but overall it's more kind of taupey, grey toned leaning, and that is the next palette I would keep. Again, beautiful shimmers. You get a good variety. There are a lot of kind of deeper shimmers though in here, like Teak, Cinder, and Ember are all very similar. I think my favorite of those is Cinder, although Teak is the one I have panned on because it was in my panned eyeshadows. But yeah, you have those more kind of like a neutral. You have a silver, which is absolutely stunning. It's definitely my favorite shimmer. It's definitely my favorite silver in my collection. You have a grey, and then you have like some unicorn shades and stuff like that. So it's a really good, well-rounded palette, and this is the second one I will keep in my top 10. Next up we have the other cool tone palette, and that is my Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. I love this palette. This one is more kind of pink tone, like mauve tone leaning. So again, this is why I picked two, because I feel like they have different uses in my collection. You do have a few more kind of grey tone, but they have some rosy tones to them, so they are more rosy and again mauve toned. There are a few shades in here that are slightly warmer, like these two up here. You do have a lot of pink shades on this side, a few purpley tones, and again I think with these two palettes together you basically have all of the cool tone shades you need. This one is not super new to me, but it's relatively new to me, but I already love this palette a lot. The shimmers in here are stunning, especially Moon Magic, Blissful, and Cosmic Love. Those are just stunning shades. Very, very sparkly, very shiny, almost like on the level of indie eyeshadows, which is stunning. But you also do have some more subtle shimmers in here too. And again, I just love this one, so that would be the next pick. So moving on, we're gonna do neutrals with a twist, and again I sorted them out by warm toned and then cool toned, and then again mixed. So first up we have the warm toned with a twist neutral palette, and I picked my Metropolis palette from Natasha Denona again. This palette is so beautiful. Again, in here you have a lot of warm tone shades, and this corner, like up here, is very warm toned. You get a lot of orangey tones, so I think again this is a good complementary palette to the gold palette, because that one is more kind of yellowy gold leaning, whereas this one has more rusty shades, things like that. But why I put this in as a neutral palette with a twist is because it has a couple colorful shades to it. It has like some green tones down here, some like green neutrals as well. Like this neutral here, for example, it is like a brown with a green undertone. You have like a taupey shade here with a slightly green hint to it as well. You have some blue shades, and again, it is a neutral with a twist. So this is the next palette I would pick, and because this has so many shades in it, that's also why I only picked one neutral warm palette, because again you get a lot of neutral shades in here that are warm leaning. So yeah, that is my next pick. For neutral with a twist cool toned, I also have one palette to share, and that is my Norvina palette, again from Anastasia. I love this. This is probably my favorite Anastasia palette I have. It's definitely one that I didn't necessarily love too much in the beginning, but I definitely love now. This one isn't, again, fully cool tone. Like these shades down here are a bit more warm. It has a lot of rosiness to it again, but I just love the shimmers in this palette. The top row is shimmers, the second row is mattes, but the shimmers in here are stunning. They're so sparkly, so like thick and pigmented in a nice way. Not like, they're not thick in the sense of being enhancing of like texture and things like that. Maybe a tiny bit, but you know, not as bad as some other things. But they're just so metallic, so foiled on the lids, and I love them. So that's probably the main reason why I want to get this palette. I also love the color story. I just love that it's so romantic feeling. It's a good, again, neutral palette with a twist. It's not boring neutrals, but I would still consider it as a neutral palette. I wouldn't say it's a colorful palette, at least not for me. So yeah, I really love this palette. It's one that I definitely fall in love with more recently, but this is one of the ones I would pick if I could only have 10 palettes. So lastly, for the kind of neutrals with a twist, we have the mixed category. So this was one that is, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily being super warm toned or super cool toned. It's like a mix in between. I think if anything is slightly more warm toned than it is cool toned. But that palette is my Pat McGrath Utopian Dreams palette. This is my only Pat McGrath palette, and this was a difficult one. I mean, obviously I love this palette, but it only has 10 shades, and it's very much like, not the One Trick Pony, but since it's only 3 mattes in here, we have a transition shade, like a deeper nap shade, and this coral shade again, which is very similar to the one in the Sultry palette. I feel like you can switch up the shimmers in here, but it is somewhat of a similar toned kind of palette. Like you can't get too different of looks. Like, of course, if you use this like purpley shade down here, which is super cool, duochrome, so is this one, and they're again super sparkly. If you use this one, for example, compared to using like this multichrome here, which goes to a green, hopefully you can see that there, you're gonna get different looks. But yeah, it was a difficult palette to put in here because it doesn't have too much variety, but I just love it so much. It's a very kind of luxurious palette. It's a very well made, weighty palette, like itself, the packaging. But the shades are also very stunning, and the special shades, which are the 4 right here, are amazing, and I would keep it mainly for those. But yeah, this is the next one I would keep, although it doesn't have too many shades. So moving into colorful palettes, or like palettes with like a color theme, I decided to do greens separately because I had quite a few greens palettes. I mean, I had 3, but I wanted to do them separately because I love wearing green eyeshadows. And out of the 3 that I have that are green palettes, it was really hard to narrow it down between 2. It was this one or the Sydney Grace Mountain Trail palette that I wanted to pick, but ultimately I decided to go with my Star Wars Mandalorian The Child palette from Colourpop. This one again has a few neutral shades in it, but I would definitely say this is a green palette. I love this palette so much. It creates very kind of, I don't know, wearable green looks, I would say. And it's surprising to me because these are kind of more cool tone greens, and normally I go for warm tone greens. Like this one here is more of a kind of warm tone green. It has like that goldiness to it, and I love that eyeshadow so much. You can create a neutral look with these three here. That creates quite a neutral look. It doesn't look very green when you look at it that way, but if you add it into the other ones, it really pulls out the green in the shade Force, which is one of my favorite shades in here. But you have again more cool tone shades, like the shade in the middle here is like a mint shade, and then you have Right Hand Mando, but they are just so stunning. They have like a bit of like silveriness to it, but like I don't know how to describe them, but I just love them, and they're very, very wearable. These here are slightly more my type of greens as well. They're like slightly warmer, but overall it is way more cool tone green than I normally go for, but it's still the one I would pick. Even though again it's just a £9 palette, I just love this one so much, and it is perfect for the theme. It's a very well weighed color story, and I love this palette so much. Next up we did colorful warm tones, and for warm tones I decided to go with one palette that is very warm toned. It has a lot of like the reddish, orangey, yellow shades that I love reaching for, and I just wanted to have a palette to cover that in my collection, and I picked the Sunrise palette from Natasha Denona. Again, it's a lot of warm tone shades, so you know it might overlap, but this is definitely brighter warm tone shades. I would not say this is a neutral palette. I mean, you do have a few neutral shades on this corner here, but even then they are quite punchy for being lighter shades. So this is definitely a colorful palette, and it's one that I would have just to cover that ground of having warm tone shades, like if you want to create those sunset looks, things like that. And I think this is a beautiful palette. The quality isn't as nice as the Gold and the Metropolis palette, but I still like it a lot, and again it would hit the spot with those shades. I only feel like I need one palette for all of that, and this is definitely one I would pick. I have everything I want in this palette, and that's why I picked the Sunrise palette from Natasha Denona. So the next category is cool toned colorful palettes, and I had 4 in this category, which was the Lilac Veloute palette from Colourpop. We have the Book of Magic by Beauty Bay, we have the Love Notes palette by Beauty Bay, and the BH Cosmetics Blueberry Muffin palette. Out of this, I was this close to picking the Love Notes palette. It was probably the 11th palette that I would have picked, like the last one, but I actually didn't pick any of these palettes. The only reason why I didn't pick the Love Notes is because again it has like lots of the rosy tones in there. It does have some more purpley tones, some like lavender shades, but overall I feel like I have the rosy tones covered. So this one is one that I did not end up picking any palettes from this category. So we skip over to the last category that I have, which is mixed. So colorful mixed palette with both cool tones and warm tones. Not really like a theme, just more like a, I don't know, color story. I don't know, you'll see what I mean when I show them. But I have 2 palettes to show in this category, which are the last 2 palettes that I have in my top 10. So I'm gonna go through them now. And actually when I opened up all of these palettes earlier, I realized these 2 palettes are actually almost like quite similar. One is more pastel, one is more saturated, and I will show you them and you'll probably see what I mean. But the first one I have is my Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace. I love this palette so much. Again, you could argue this is like a neutral palette with a twist again, but I don't know, I put it into colorful because I see it as like a pastel, kind of somewhat pastel colorful palette, but yeah, maybe should have gone into the colorful with a twist, I don't know, but it is here now anyway. I love this palette so much. It's beautiful. The shimmers in here are very kind of foiled, beautiful, kind of typical Sydney Grace formula. Same with the mattes. They're so good. Like the mattes in here are like the top notch, best of the best quality from Sydney Grace. They're always good, but some of their mattes are slightly better, and these are the best. I love these shades. You can create a lot of looks with this palette on its own. You also have some pastel shades here, so like for example here we have a lilac shade, so I could do something more lilac-y with this palette. This shade here is also beautiful. This is more kind of the warmer tone greens that I was talking about. I love this shade. And then yeah, Firebuds as well, which is a shimmer. I love that as well. But then overall I don't know, I just love this palette. I don't want to get rid of it at all. I mean I probably have a lot of these shades in some of the other palettes I've shown you, but this one is just slightly like less saturated. It's a pastel palette. Even the neutrals in here are very kind of pastel-y feeling, like subdued, like it's just beautiful. I love this palette a lot, and if you haven't tried this one and you've been thinking about it, please do pick it up. It's so good. I didn't pick this up for a long time, but I did get it last year and I don't regret it at all. It's one of my favorite palettes in my collection. And then the last palette that I have to share with you is unfortunately one that is discontinued, and that is my Club Nebula palette from Kaleidos. This one is like the most, I would say, colorful palette out of the ones that I picked, and it looks like this. If you again would have to say anything, it would be probably more cool toned than warm toned when it comes to like the inside and the color story, but you do have some warm tones down here, and that's why I put it in the mixed category. But again, I just feel like this is a more saturated version of the Tiny Marvels palette. Again, they're not the same, but they just give me a similar vibe. I don't know why I felt that way when I looked at them earlier. They're not the exact, but they just have, you know, the peachy shades, they have the green shades, kind of purpley leaning shades like this here and these here. I'm holding this very awkwardly, but I just thought they were similar vibes, but the Club Nebula palette is way more saturated. Again, it is kind of the more colorful palette. You have like the blues and greens in here. I haven't picked any blue palettes. Again, those would have been in the colorful cool tone palettes, but I didn't pick any of those, and I don't have too many blue palettes overall. I have the Blueberry Muffin, and then the Book of Magic have a lot of blue in it, but you have some blue in here, so I think that would hit the spot for me. And I also have some blue singles, which I could complement these with. You have this green here, which is such a fiery acidy green. I love that shade. You have some more kind of cool tone neutrals here. They are like more plum leaning, or I don't know, like purpley leaning. You have the warm tones down here, and then some beautiful shimmers as well. And I love this palette. It is, like I said, unfortunately discontinued, but I would definitely want to keep this one if I could only keep 10. And that is also the last palette that I have. So again, that is the last palette I want to show you, but I just want to pop up a picture here of what all of the palettes look like together, because I just thought it would be fun to open all of them up and look at what the color stories, or what they would look like if I just put all of the 10 palettes next to each other. And here you go. So I mean, there are a lot of overlapping shades, but I think that would happen in any case, because this can be the basic kind of shades that are very common in palettes that you can gonna see in most of your palettes. But I'm happy with this overview and this, like, you know, overall picks, and I think I would be happy with these palettes. You know, I love all the palettes that I have. I'm not planning to declutter any of the other ones, really. I mean, there's a couple that are on the shopping block, but overall I'm happy with the collection that I have at the moment. But if for some reason I had to narrow my collection down and only keep 10, these would be the 10 that I picked. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and otherwise I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.